I've mentioned on more than one occasion that my wife was an English teacher at several levels. And the novel is her thing. She really is an expert in the novel. She inhales them. And by that I mean, if I say that she reads 100 novels a year, that would be on the low side. That would be only 2 a week. Very conservative estimate. I've seen weeks where she's read 3 or 4 novels in 1 week. And these books are sacred to her. She doesn't let me touch them. If I start circling around a certain book, she says, "Go to the library. Don't touch that book." And I obey. I have been known to spill coffee on books, to mark books, and I know. In defense of my wife, I sometimes do that. So I don't get to touch her books. They're sacred to her. Well, on occasion, she has said to me, after she has read a really good book, and sometimes it's from a very famous, well-known writer or author, she would say, "That was a good read, but the writer just didn't know how to end the story." That's somewhat of an infrequent, but I've heard that. The writer just didn't know how to end the story. I mention that because we are at the end of a story. We are at the end. We are at the last Sunday today. This is the end of the Christian year. The curtain comes down after this Sunday. Next Sunday, we begin to tell the story all over again. We start Advent, the first Sunday of Advent, which is the first Sunday of the new year in the church's calendar. Advent being those 4 Sundays when we begin anew. We begin to decorate the house and the church. We begin to listen and wait and pray, and the expectation of the coming of Christmas and all the wonder and marvel of that celebration. So how do we end the church year? How do we bring down the curtain in a way that really gives meaning and substance and joy and meaning to what we are about here in the Christian story? The psalmist, given to us for this very day, begins his 93rd psalm by saying, "The Lord is King. He is robed in majesty. He is girded with strength. He has established the world. It shall never be moved." So that's how we bring down the curtain at the end of this, another church year. We hear again and celebrate again that God is King. God is ruler. The world has been established, made, and ordered. The King has done this all. Now, the psalmist also talks about the floods have lifted up. The floods have lifted up their voice, but they are nothing. They will have their day and then they're gone. The floods have lifted up. The chaos lifts up its head. The disobedience of the world lifts up its head. All of the strife and agony and pain and meanness of the world, the floods have lifted up, but our God is Lord of the earth and everything. He is King. Robed in majesty, girded with strength, majestic on high, is the Lord. That's the vision. That's the word for the last Sunday of a church year. But then we have the gospel reading. And it's an interesting come back and forth between what the psalmist says and what the Gospels say. We are introduced in the gospel reading by someone who believes that he has great power, Pontius Pilate. Actually, in the next chapter, if we went into the 19th chapter of John, he will say to Jesus, "Don't you know that I have the power to crucify you?" So the power of the world is vested here in Pilate. And Jesus says to him, "My kingdom is not from this world." Now, if we read this in believing that God's presence and power and kingship is not among us, we are misreading this text altogether. God isn't absent from this world. God hasn't given this world over to Pilate. God is king of every inch of this world. Every acre of this world belongs to God. And so Jesus says, "My kingdom is not from this world." Then what does he mean? People have tried to understand that for a long, long time. Jesus' kingdom is not from this world. And so people have thought, well, this world is corrupt and Jesus' kingdom is not in this world, so we need to get out of this world somehow. We need to separate ourselves from this world so that we won't be corrupted by it. And so early in the Christian history, people went to the desert. Many people, the desert fathers, they went to the desert with the idea if they could just get out of the world, they could live a faithful life to God because the world is so corrupt. Others in more recent times, in this country especially, and you will recognize some of the names here, thought that, well, we can't get to the desert, but maybe we can gather ourselves together in a perfect community, a utopian community. New Harmony, Old Economy. Do you recognize any of those names? The Shakers, others. They spread all across the country in America during the 19th century. And their understanding was, if we can just get out of this terrible world, this awful place where the floods are coming up, and if we can just separate ourselves, and we could have a perfect society. But of course, every one of them failed because sooner or later, the world had a way of getting inside the perfect community. And Jesus said, didn't he? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's. And so it may appear that what he's saying is, there are two kingdoms. There's the Jesus kingdom, and Jesus is king, but Jesus is king of the spiritual life, the inner life, the private life of people. Render unto Caesar. Well, then there's a public life, there's a secular life, and we follow Caesar. Caesar appears all through history by different names. Marshal Stalin, Chairman Mao, Prime Minister Idi Amin, King George. All of these Caesars, they come through history. They write history. They seem like they're in charge of history. They have great power, all of these Caesars. They have the power to wage war. They have the power to exploit people. They have power to raise taxes. They have all this power over our lives. And Jesus, his kingdom is personal, private, spiritual. And all of these Caesars, we render unto them because they are in charge now in the secular world. And we now are members of two kingdoms, dual citizenship, where Jesus is king and where Caesar is king. But what if we've read this wrong in reading the text this way? The psalmist, for example, would be aghast. The psalmist would be speechless if he heard that the world had been given over to another name other than God. For him, the world is established by God. God is the king of everything. Every acre, every inch of the world belongs to God. And what if we've misunderstood Jesus here when he says, render unto God, render unto Caesar? What if we read that again and understood that what he's really saying is, it all belongs to God? What if that's the real meaning of the text, which I believe it is? When he said, render unto Caesar, render unto God, he was saying, it's all God's. And when Jesus said, my kingdom is not from this world, what if he meant, and I'm absolutely positive at this point, this is what he did mean, that the world as it's understood by the floods, by the chaos, the world that we see, the world that is before us, this world, where bombs drop on hospitals, this world, where politicians take bribes, this world, where nation rises up against nation, this world in which esteemed scientists will mess around with their results and change their scientific discoveries because they can make money off of lies. This world in which there are children being sold into sexual slavery and child brides and all that kind of stuff. This world in which some of us have more than we could ever need. More than we could ever need. And there are others who have less than life requires. This world. What if Jesus really means here, my kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is among you, but not like that. Today we celebrate the reign of Christ. Not a reign that's just in our hearts. Not a reign that's just in our minds and in our private little personal, selfish, small lives. Christ is Lord. Christ is King. The reign of Christ knows no place where it does not claim its authority. The reign of Christ. The reign of Christ is for Main Street and Bourbon Street and 10 Downing Street and Easy Street. The reign of Christ is for the entire creation. Christ is King. Christ is Lord of every life and every place. And so we bring down the curtain, we bring down the end with this joyful in our hearts firm to believe, in our minds strong to hold. Christ is Lord of everything. And there's no place on earth that his lordship doesn't claim its authority and its rule. Every place. We come together on the last Sunday of the church year. We come together because we're in training to see this. We're in training to know this. We are the people who claim that Jesus Christ is Lord of all, of everywhere, of every time, of every place, of every heart. We're in training. And we have all these great Bible stories of people all through our biblical history. People who have shown us how you do this. And I think of those women in the early stories of the Bible who were told by Pharaoh, the Caesar of that day, kill all of the boy babies. And the story says that the women feared God. What a wonderful statement. Feared God, and they wouldn't do it. And so instead of killing the boy babies when Moses came into the world, they put him in a little basket and sent him down on the Nile. I think of Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. You know those three people from the story in the book of Daniel, where they were taken into captivity into Babylon, and they were told, there is a great God of gold that you will bow to. And when the musical instruments play, you are to bow to the Babylon God, the God of Babylonia. And they said to the Caesar of that day, the king of Babylon, oh yes, you have prepared a blazing fiery furnace for us unless we bow the knee. But let me tell you, O king, we will not bow the knee. God is able to deliver us, but if not, I like that. That's one of the best verses of the Bible. God can deliver us, but if not, we will not bow the knee, because there is one king, and we will not bow the knee to you, to any god, to any gold, to any place, to any time. We belong to the King of the universe, majestic on high, girded with truth. More majestic than the roaring sea. Majestic on high is he, they would say to the king of Babylon. Or then there was James and John in the New Testament. And they were brought into the authorities, and they were told, stop it. Stop preaching about this Jesus. And James and John said to those in authority, those who were under the rule of the Caesar of that day, we can't stop. We can't stop saying what we know, what we've seen and what we've heard has changed our lives. It's going to change the world. Christ is King, and we cannot stop what we're doing. Or I think of Paul and Silas. It's one of my favorite stories of the Bible. They were arrested in Philippi. They were beaten, bloodied with baseball bats. They were thrown into the depth of the prison there in Philippi, bloodied, beaten, jailed, chains around their feet and their hands. This is one. If I could ever have a scene in the Bible that I'd want to see, it would be this one. And there in the midnight hour, while all of the prisoners were not sleeping, but they were awake and they were listening, Paul and Silas are praying and singing hymns. Wouldn't you like to have heard that? And every one of these cases, and each and every one, and so many more, people have been told what they must do, what they should do, what they have to do. They've been instructed about what the sovereign, what the Caesar tells them they must be about. And each and every one of them and more. Oh, our history is so full of the saints, their stories, their witnesses among us, would never bow the knee. They knew that God is robed in majesty. They knew that Christ is King and Lord. So let us end the year with all of the bells ringing, with all of our hearts singing, with our minds firmly to know, and our hearts strong to beat. We know who we are. We know where the world is headed. We know that God is King, robed in majesty. And we know that Jesus Christ is the Alpha and Omega, the Lord and King of our hearts, of our lives, and of the world, this world and the world to come. Amen.